Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Technology, a podcast exploring the latest in computers, networking, home automation, mobile computing, and all things technology related. Our hosts will take a deeper dive into the latest and greatest in tech trends and give you the information you need to enable your tech-centric world.
This is Insights into Technology, Episode 13, U.S. Under CyberSeige and the Year in Review. I'm your host, Joseph Whelan, and here's your cyber news of the week. White House blames telecoms lack security on Salt Typhoon. This comes to us from Cyberscoop. In a statement released by the White House, it was revealed that the Salt Typhoon cyber espionage attacks targeting U.S. telecommunications companies occurred largely due to inadequate cybersecurity measures in the sector. The attacks, attributed to Chinese state-affiliated actors, compromised 9 telecom firms, exploiting weak system configurations and poor access management. Alarmingly, in one case, attackers accessed an administrator account managing over 100,000 routers and erased critical activity logs, obscuring the full extent of the breach. Ann Neuberger, Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology, emphasized the pressing need for improved cybersecurity practices, including robust configuration management, vulnerability mitigation, and network segmentation. The Biden administration is urging telecommunications companies to adopt stringent security controls and has shared new threat hunting guidelines. Comparisons with similar regulations in the UK and Australia highlight the potential for improved detection and mitigation of such attacks if stronger frameworks were in place. The hackers reportedly targeted individuals in Washington, D.C., including government officials, underscoring the espionage's strategic intent to gather intelligence for follow-up operations. So, the kicker here really is interesting. So the federal government is criticizing these telecommunications companies for not adhering to basic cybersecurity practices, when in fact it was the federal and local governments that forced the telecommunication companies themselves to basically put backdoors into their system to make wiretapping easier. And now you've got malicious actors who are utilizing those backdoors that the federal government forced them to put in. So this is kind of a case of the federal government making their own problems at this point in time. Cybersecurity as a competitive and strategic necessity is an absolute must. The fact that the federal government is getting involved at this point in time, it's a case of closing the barn door after the horse has gotten out. The hacks reveal the critical vulnerabilities in commercial telecommunications, some of which were mandated by the federal government. They highlight basic cybersecurity measures are often overlooked. And that's true in, I think, every company out there. And the problem that you run into is that security and convenience are mutually exclusive. The more security you impose, the less convenience you have. And when most people turn to technology for its convenience, when you start siphoning off that convenience for the sake of security, the technology itself starts to lose the advantages that it was originally employed for. From an enterprise standpoint, enterprises need to adopt security as a core component, not bolted on after the fact. When you build a system, you need to build that system with security in mind. You need to build it as part of your core infrastructure. And you need to keep that philosophy in mind the entire time life cycle, because as you progress through the technology life cycle, you're going to have replacements of network hardware. You're going to upgrade your operating systems, obviously, your hardware for your servers. Security has to be forefront in the mind during all of those phases. The telecoms weaknesses is an industry-wide threat, because very few companies out there don't rely on some form of internet provider or telecom provider. When those core services become corrupted or co-opted, you're now spreading that downstream to all of the clients that are using those services. It demonstrates how a single point of failure at a telecom can have a cascading effect on multiple organizations and their customers. As an enterprise, we need to consider those downstream risks posed by third-party providers. There's a lot of third-party providers other than telecoms that are now in the mix. We talked a little bit about it last week, in last episode, where most companies operate in a hybrid environment. You've got some cloud-based components. You've got some local components. Your local components obviously are dependent on your local ISPs. You might have a managed service provider that has, hooks into your system for management and monitoring. We've had situations in the past where tools that MSPs use have been compromised, and that in turn allows them to compromise those MSPs' clients. So when you look at this from a security standpoint, you have to look at it from a holistic standpoint and understand all of the moving components that are involved in making your average business work today with telecommunications and technology. Whether it's a outsourced development house that you're working with, or your managed service provider, or an outside consultant, anybody who has access into your systems is a potential threat. That's why a lot of companies, a lot of enterprises are moving towards the zero trust architecture model, which isn't bulletproof, isn't foolproof, but it's definitely an improvement. It would certainly help mitigate some of these supply chain risks that we're running into here. So we'll see how this plays out. The last I heard on this was the telecoms still don't know if they got them out of the systems yet, which is frightening, really. I mean, they don't know the extent of the breach. They don't know the extent of the damage, what data has been released entirely. Nor do they know if they're out of the system yet. And that's more alarming, I think, than anything. So we'll see how that plays out, and we'll see how it's going to impact commercial and enterprise computing moving forward. Needless to say, it's not a good sign, but the federal government getting involved now and trying to mandate cybersecurity fundamentals at these telecommunications companies is a move in the right direction, even though it may be a little bit late. Next up, we have an article from Security Week talking about Cisco confirming their data leaks now. Again, this goes back to third parties. People depend on hardware vendors like Cisco for security. Cisco's confirmed that 4 gigabytes of data leaked by the hacker known as Intel Broker is authentic and tied to an earlier security incident involving its public-facing Dev Hub environment. The Dev Hub is a resource center for source code and scripts. It was not breached, but some files not intended for public access were stolen. The leaked data includes source code, scripts, and digital certificates, and configuration files related to Cisco products, raising concerns about potential misuse. While the hacker initially claimed to have exfiltrated 800 gigabytes of data, subsequent leaks in December brought that total to over 4 gigabytes. Cisco maintains that no production or enterprise environments were accessed and has not identified sensitive personal or financial data in the leaks. However, its decision to remove earlier assurances about compromised sensitive data has drawn attention, highlighting the complexity of managing post-breach communications and trust in enterprise security. So again, the implications of public-facing development resources. We talked about this a few weeks ago. There's been a push in recent years to move to GitHub and other public repositories. The advancements in development procedures and development techniques employ a lot of shared libraries. Those libraries can be compromised if they're not centralized and controlled by the individual corporation that's using it. These all increase the likelihood of a breach or at least the vulnerability. This also raises questions about how development platforms, like those intended for customer resources, can be secured against malicious actors. Organizations need to scrutinize their public-facing resources, implement tighter access controls, and ensure that sensitive files are separated from publicly accessible data. Data tagging or data labeling is a technique that's in use now to determine what should and shouldn't be public, but it requires discipline. It requires an effort to accomplish this. And for a lot of companies, it's a massive change in operating procedures to tag all of your data. The federal government's been dealing with this for years with classifications on their data. And obviously they've got a system that works for the most part, unless you ship your files down to Mar-a-Lago and they sit in the bathroom. But, something like that in-house. We're working on something like that already in my organization, where we need to be able to tag data. We need to be able to exercise on those tags so that certain data can be made public. And even internally, you need to restrict your data, right? You're going to have situations where some aspects of your user population doesn't need to have access to data. Your general rank and file employees, you don't want them having access to your financial data or your human resources data. So internally, most organizations have things in place to control these types of things, and you have to take that to the next level so that information doesn't get out to the public. The other thing that this situation highlights is the mismanagement of communications in these incidents. Cisco initially claimed that no sensitive data was compromised, but later removed those assurances. The evolution of this type of communication erodes trust among enterprises. Your customers are not going to trust you anymore. Your clients rely on transparency in communications. It minimizes exposure to them. If they know that their data has been compromised, they can take actions to mitigate it, or at least implement damage control. And when you start, pulling back on your statements, it's one thing to make a statement that's vague because your investigation is ongoing. It's another to make a very explicit statement with the purpose of reassuring your customers if you don't have the data to back that up. The absence of evidence of a breach or of a breach of a certain type of data does not mean that data hasn't been breached. And that has to be with every statement that's out there. As of right now, no personal data has been breached. That's the first thing that you say. You have to manage expectations. It's difficult. Nobody wants to go out there and admit that they've been breached. There's a liability associated with it from a legal and financial standpoint. There's a trust concern that's associated with that. But by trying to conceal that information, or by trying to present too much of a rosy front up front in the face of a breach, only to find out that reality is a lot different than that. That does more damage, I think, than the breach does sometimes. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from this. We look at the technical side of it. Data segmentation is certainly one thing. Monitoring, there's a lot of push now for AI monitoring of network traffic so that you can detect when something's being exfiltrated from your network. Fortunately, technology is rapidly evolving from a security standpoint to help us patch some of these holes and to have insight into the traffic itself so that when something is happening, you can be aware of it. So we'll see how Cisco weathers this storm here. I'm sure they'll come out of this stronger, if nothing else. But, they're Cisco. Nobody got, just like IBM, nobody got fired for picking IBM. Nobody got fired for picking Cisco. I think that rule still stands for the most part. Our next story comes to us from Reuters. They tell us that U.S. Treasury says Chinese hackers stole documents in, quote, major incident. Chinese state-sponsored hackers breached the U.S. Treasury Department systems in what officials describe as a major incident, compromising documents through a vulnerability in third-party provider Beyond Trust remote support product. Using a stolen key, the hackers bypassed security protocols to access workstations and unclassified documents from Treasury Department offices. The breach was attributed to an advanced persistent threat group linked to China. Beyond Trust identified the breach in early December and has been cooperating with the FBI and U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure, CISA, security agency, and the Treasury to mitigate the impact. China denied responsibility, dismissing the accusations as baseless. Cybersecurity experts noted the attack follows a pattern of exploiting trusted third-party services, a tactic increasingly favored by China-linked groups. Beyond Trust has since addressed the vulnerability and notified affected customers. The incident highlights the growing risk of supply chain vulnerabilities and the importance of securing third-party services in critical government and enterprise infrastructure. So again, we look at supply chain infrastructure here. This is another situation where you're dependent on an outside company, and that company basically disappoints you and falls down on the job. The vulnerability of third-party service providers has to be a concern. You don't have much control over their vulnerabilities, but you need to be aware of what those vulnerabilities could potentially be. In this case, the hackers exploited Beyond Trust remote support product, which highlights the risks enterprise face when third-party service providers are compromised. The breach underscores how attackers can bypass direct defenses by targeting weaker links in the supply chain. And like with any chain concept, the weakest link is the one that you have to worry about the most. So we can't have every link in the chain be as secure as every other. Identifying the weak links or identifying the risks allows you, if you can't mitigate those risks, you can monitor those risks for exploitation. And ultimately, you can accept those risks as part of the risk management process itself. But you can't accept risks that you can't monitor. That's the scariest thing out there. This growing reliance on external vendors for IT and cybersecurity services offers an ever-increasing threat surface to attackers to exploit. Everyone was concerned years ago about putting all your eggs in one basket and dropping everything into a single provider or hosting yourself. In a way, while that makes you more vulnerable to catastrophic failures, it also allowed you to at least have a single point to monitor and know when things were going on. Now, so many of our services are spread out over so many different providers, none of which you have control over. and all of which seem to adhere to different security practices. And even when you find a provider that adheres to security practices that adhere or coalesce with your security concerns, that isn't a constant state of security there because of staff overturn and technology migrations and so forth. So even though you may find a provider today who is secure and adopts a cybersecurity framework that you as an organization are comfortable with, that situation changes rapidly. And you may lose that level of security as they go through staff cuts or staff turnover, or they upgrade their systems, their firewalls, their software. New threats are introduced, and it's got to be a situation of constant vigilance. In this case here, an exploitation of privileged access happened. Something like that should never happen. You should always be following least privileged access premises and philosophies to minimize that type of thing. The other issue we run into is because these state-sponsored attacks are so well funded and so well organized, it's very difficult for a single IT organization or your provider to monitor, mitigate, and defend against these things. They just don't have the same resources to. This is where I rail against unfunded mandates from the government all the time. I think the federal government needs to be stepping in to provide some level of security on a national level here. It's getting to the point where we're literally under CyberSeige at this point in time. We are a pilgrim in an unholy land when we have so many adversaries that are trying to attack us, and the federal government just wants to basically dictate how we should deal with it, and are spending not nearly as much in the way of resources to providing it. Everyone criticizes China for having the Great Firewall of China. The United States is getting to the point where we're going to need to do something like that to protect our critical infrastructure. I think it's going to irk a lot of people by jeopardizing your net neutralities and your freedoms and things along those lines. And it's true, it will. But sometimes the only way to protect it's either that or you don't protect yourself. You either assume you're going to get attacked or you protect yourself, and that protection takes away some of the rights that you enjoy now. There isn't really much of a compromise that can happen there. We'll see how the federal government decides to move forward with that. We're going to take a quick break here. Before we do, let's real quick invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things pretty much anywhere you get a podcast these days. Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, not Stitcher, Stitcher's out, Amazon, Buzzsprout. I would also invite you to write in, give us your feedback, tell us how we're doing. Are there topics you want us to cover? Do you just have comments on some of the stories that we've done here? You can email comments at insightsintothings.com. You can find us on X at X, I guess it's x.com/insights_things. You can also call in, leave us a voicemail. We'll get your message on the next available podcast if possible. Our number is 856-403-8788. That's 856-403-8788. You can also find all of our links, our contact links, on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. We'll be right back.
Are you tired of your favorite gaming podcast finishing with a play?
Oh, no!
Well, check out No Credits Rolled, where we play the games but rarely finish them. How's it going, folks? I'm Sam Whelan, your friendly host at No Credits Rolled, the ultimate gaming podcast, where we dish out the latest scoops and reviews on all your beloved video games.
Hey, listen!
Not only that, but we spice things up with some guest interviews and even give you, yes, you, a chance to have your say. Tune in every other week for a fresh dose of No Credits Rolled, available on all major podcast platforms, and hit us up on social media at No Credits Rolled. So why wait? Let's dive into the gaming world together, where finishing games is optional, but the fun is guaranteed.
Next up, we have the record reporting that HIPAA to be updated with cybersecurity regulations. This one it's rather close to the belt here since we just had our deep dive into HIPAA frameworks. The White House announced plans to update the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act with new cybersecurity regulations, marking the first revision in the 20-year-old rules since 2013. These changes aim to enhance the security of healthcare by requiring measures like data encryption to prevent breaches and mitigate potential risks to patients. Deputy National Security Advisor Ann Neuberger highlighted the urgency of these updates, citing citing the rising frequency and severity of healthcare data breaches, including ransomware attacks on major institutions like Change Healthcare and Ascension Hospital Network, which expose sensitive data and cause significant financial and operational disruptions. The proposed regulations will also mandate healthcare organizations to monitor networks for threats and conduct compliance checks, with implementation costs estimated at $9 billion in the first year and $6 billion annually thereafter. Backed by Congress, this effort seeks to address an alarming 89% increase in large-scale breaches since 2019, emphasizing the critical need for stronger safeguards to protect patient data and prevent disruptions to essential healthcare services. Public comments on the draft rules will be solicited through the Federal Register, underscoring a collaborative approach to strengthening the nation's healthcare cybersecurity framework. So this is another one where the federal government's getting involved. They're mandating changes, and the changes themselves are extraordinarily expensive. This is being labeled as a game changer for data security. Mandating encryption of healthcare data, which seems like a no-brainer at this point in time. How any of your data out there isn't encrypted at rest, in use, and in transit, which is one of the most fundamental cybersecurity principles that's in practice, is just mind-boggling. Doing so obviously will significantly raise the bar for data protection. It'll likely drive widespread adoption of enterprise-grade encryption solutions, not only in healthcare, but also as a best practice for other industries, which, newsflash, it already is in most other industries. The fact that the healthcare industry is so far behind when they already have a framework for securing your data, honestly, it just demonstrates how slow the federal government is to respond to any kind of serious threats, which is why relying on the federal government to mandate security in such a rapidly changing threat environment is really a bad idea. Enterprises that are managing sensitive data may preemptively align with these standards, which many of them already have. The cost of compliance is going to have a ripple effect, and we've seen this across the board. My industry's been dealing with this from a government manufacturing standpoint for quite some time now, where cybersecurity is expensive. There's no way to get around that. Between equipment and software and licensing and paying for the expertise, it's an expensive proposition. And when You only do it when you're forced to do it by the government, and the government doesn't provide any funding. That cost is absorbed by the companies. And like with any cost that a commercial entity has to endure, it doesn't handle it itself. It passes it down the line. So in the coming years, you're going to see these prices pass down through the healthcare system, through your insurance companies. You're going to see your insurance rates go up. You're going to see your healthcare costs go up. And I can't say they shouldn't do this. They definitely need to do it. But again, this is one of those things where the federal government should be offering some level of either service or compensation, providing tax incentives of some sort, providing federal funds for these types of things, or developing their own cybersecurity solutions and using those solutions to deploy in these areas that they're requiring it. There has to be a better way to do this. This is almost the same type of issue that we're running into from an infrastructure standpoint with our highway systems and bridges falling apart. And the federal government does nothing about it for decades until you literally have bridges falling, and all of a sudden that cost needs to be eaten by the taxpayers. They're running into the same thing here with cybersecurity. It's a ticking time bomb waiting to happen. Enterprise risk management and ransomware is something that's going to be employed during all of these types of things. The report underscores the devastating financial and operational impact of ransomware. There are cases where $850 million in losses for Change Healthcare. It's just, that's small compared to what the revenue is. But no company can absorb an $850 million loss and it not have some kind of impact. And that impact ultimately gets passed down to the consumer. The consumer pays for it all. Sometimes it gets tied up in the shuffle. It gets a little bit murky and foggy, but by the time it's all well and done, it's the users, it's the client or patients in this case that are footing it. The impact on governance, IT governance, and workforce training. You're going to see what we're running into right now with CMMC in my industry is we have an upfront cost to determine where your gaps are. And then there's a cost to mitigate those gaps. And then there's a cost to the documentation. Then there's an ongoing cost to maintain that level of security. But tertiary or adjunctly, I should say, to that is the fact that every one of your employees needs to be trained to use the new security systems, to be aware of the risks, and they need refresher training that happens on a regular basis. All this has a cost associated with it. And a lot of companies that start down this path don't realize just how costly it is. A lot of companies want to dump some money into it, be done with it, and walk away. But there are operational changes, operational costs, and efficiency costs that happen. Just give an example for CMMC. So a company that handles controlled unclassified information, which is basically information that's generated that needs to be protected. For my company to protect that information, we use a third-party source for that provides us with a secure enclave. So users that previously would work on a job, we would get drawings on a job, that those drawings would be maybe printed out or dropped on a plotter or whatever, and tacked against a board on the wall that people would reference or engineers would reference. Well, with the requirements that I have now, I can't print the document. I can't have a hard copy of it. Anybody who needs to access that document needs to do so through this third-party secure enclave that's multi-factor authentication, and it's encrypted, and all these other controls. So I have a limited number of licensing that I can deploy that to, but I have a number of users that have to touch the document, maybe 5 times the number of licenses that I have, and I have to accommodate that with additional licensing. Everything. Just a consultation on one aspect of a drawing now becomes a very long, drawn-out affair to do it securely. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it securely, but organizations that move to these secure practices need to understand the impact. It's not just a matter of your data sits on a server and it's encrypted and that's secure. Everything from how you generate the data to how you edit it to how you consume it completely changes when you're talking about securing that environment. And a lot of companies don't understand that. They don't have a position in place to even compensate for that. So it's a much bigger impact than I think than just policy changes and the cost of it actually play out. And a lot of companies that are going down the path of doing this don't fully appreciate how big of a task this is. And I think it's going to scare a lot of companies out there when they get to that point. Next up, the BBC tells us that Trump urges the Supreme Court to delay the TikTok ban. Now, before I get into the nitty-gritty of Trump's not wanting the TikTok ban to go through, it's important to note that it was Trump who was the first one to propose that TikTok be banned and actually wound up enacting a executive order along those lines, which was then fought in court and eventually rescinded by the Biden administration. And Trump's reason for it was for national security. So he's coming back into office now and he wants the ban delayed. You know, you have to ask yourself, why would you want it delayed now when you've been pushing for it for 8 years, better part of 8 years now? The devil's in the detail. President-elect Trump has asked the U.S. Supreme Court to delay a looming ban on TikTok, seeking time to resolve the issue through political means after he takes office. The Supreme Court is set to hear arguments on January 10th about a law requiring TikTok's Chinese owner ByteDance to divest the platform to a U.S.-based company or face a nationwide ban starting January 19th, the day before inauguration. The legislation, rooted in bipartisan concerns over national security and allegations of Chinese government ties to ByteDance, has been met with legal challenges from TikTok, arguing it infringes upon free speech protections. In the court filing, Trump emphasized the complexity of balancing free speech rights against the national security concerns and expressed a desire to avoid a court-driven solution, even though he initiated it himself. Despite publicly opposing the ban and meeting with TikTok CEO Shouzi Chu recently, Trump's position contrasts with bipartisan support for the legislation. As the ban deadline approaches, the case underscores the broader tensions between technology, governance, and geopolitical concerns, with nearly 24 state attorneys general backing the divest or ban requirement. So this is a classic example of a double take here. Now, this story doesn't go into the details of why Trump doesn't want the ban to happen now, but there's heavy speculation on it being politically motivated to monetarily motivated to several other theories that are out there that I'd rather not get into. But the problem here is you have all this bipartisan support of all our other elected members. You have all these attorneys generals who were backing this, and it was set to go. In fact, the courts have overturned all the appeals and fights to prevent it. The last act of appeal here is obviously the Supreme Court, and now you've got Trump stepping in to want to stop this. Now, Trump told you, 7 years ago that this was a national security concern. Everybody else who wanted this ban is telling you it's a national security concern. At what point in time is national security thrown by the wayside? Is it a free speech thing? Something tells me that Trump really wouldn't care too much about it being a free speech thing. That's just my take on it. So there has to be some other motivation here. You know, this is going to have an impact on other social media and app ecosystems. A forced divestiture introduces significant uncertainty for the app ecosystem out there, especially for anything reliant on the U.S.-China collaboration. The other problem that you run into is when you start banning companies that you label as nationalist companies, what happens when those countries start banning U.S. companies or European companies? What happens when that retaliation on a national level starts? You're going to start, again, a cyber war. This is another war of the U.S. being under cyber siege here. I think sometimes our politicians propose legislation for the sake of making headlines and pushing their own agendas without really thinking things through. They're really not probably the most qualified people to be making decisions like this from a technology standpoint, and it sets a very dangerous precedent. We'll see how this one plays out. This one, we're going to get the results of this one fairly quickly within the next couple of weeks, so we'll see which direction it winds up going in. The last story for today comes to us from GeekWire. Can Microsoft avoid the ghost of Clippy? And this is in the interest of not doing all cybersecurity on a technology podcast. So GeekWire tells us that Microsoft's rollout of its AI-powered Copilot assistant to Microsoft 365 personal and family subscriptions in select regions has sparked mixed reactions, reminiscent of the infamous Clippy assistant from the 1990s. Initially offered as an optional $20 a month pro service, Copilot is now being integrated by default into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Office apps. While the AI tool can generate drafts, analyze data, and create visuals, some users have criticized its intrusive behavior, with comparisons to Clippy highlighting its tendency to disrupt workflows. Despite these challenges, Microsoft has seen substantial success with its AI initiatives, with projected annual AI revenue exceeding $10 billion. Company executives have defended Copilot's effectiveness, noting widespread internal adoption by Microsoft. I'm not sure that's really the precedent you should be citing here for internal adoption. However, the backlash underscores the delicate balance required to integrate new technologies at scale without alienating users, as Microsoft seeks to maintain its leadership in enterprise and consumer productivity tools amidst evolving user expectations. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes Microsoft tends to implement these things without really thinking them through, and certainly without doing any kind of focus group analysis or anything like that. Copilot, with like any other AI tool that's out there now, can be very useful when you're not jamming it down my throat. I love the analogy to Clippy here. I actually was a fan of Clippy. I thought Clippy, actually, I got rid of Clippy and I always used the Einstein model. Seeing Einstein scroll from the corner of my screen, groggy with a cup of coffee in the morning, always entertained me. But it's the same type of thing. Clippy was supposed to be that early version of artificial intelligence to help you. But Copilot now is embedded into everything. I just downloaded Microsoft Office to put Outlook on my iPad, and it's jamming Copilot down my throat there. I can't log into a Microsoft application without getting some kind of tutorial or solicitation for Copilot. It is getting to the point where it's ridiculously annoying at this point. And you're going to turn people off. Now, you're making $10 billion off of this now. Do you really want to risk alienating people from using that and not getting a large portion of that share? And it's not just about making money. It's about making the user experience, or at least it should be about making the user experience better. I think Microsoft they lost that sight of that a long time ago. We'll see where this winds up. I don't see Microsoft letting up on the propaganda machine for Copilot anytime soon. They just have too much money invested in it. They're in the process now of trying to divorce themselves from OpenAI because of the controversy there. And they're looking to build out their own in-house AI. So this, if anything, this is going to get worse before it gets any better. That's just my take on it. But I think this is going to be a big issue in the coming year. We're going to take our last break. And when we come back, we're going to take a look at the top technology and computing trends and issues of 2024. We're actually going to take a break from our deep dive. We have one more deep dive session into our frameworks to do our year in review. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
In 2024, the technology and computing sectors experienced significant advancements and challenges that shape the industry's landscape. We're going to talk about, I've got 5 stories and I've got 5 honorable mentions. We'll see how long we go with this. So the first thing up is advancements in quantum computing. Some of these we actually covered on the podcast itself. We did talk about Google unveiling its new quantum chip Willow, capable of solving complex problems at unprecedented speeds, highlighting the transformative potential of quantum computing. Now, when we covered this, the one concern that I had was that all of the benchmarks that they were judging their performance on were homegrown benchmarks, and they took the performance increase that they had, and they kind of muddied the waters with it when they tried to pitch it as proof that there are multiple universes, because it performed a task that was so complex that it would have taken longer than our universe existed in order to complete. That's kind of a stretch there. I think they were really just trying to grab headlines. Quantum computing, no doubt, has come a long way. It has a very long way to go. I don't think 2025 is going to be the year of quantum computing. The technology is a little too far off from that, but I could be wrong. The next up was AI integration in consumer appliances. Microsoft tested the integration of its Copilot AI assistant into Microsoft 365 Personal and Family. We just talked about that. They're aiming to enhance user productivity across applications like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. A lot of companies integrated AI. Adobe did it into their products. They're pretty revolutionary what they're doing from a media standpoint with AI, generating images, taking existing images and enhancing them with AI. They're even generating videos at this point in time entirely through AI. I'm a big supporter of AI myself. I use it for assistance in supplementing writing, idea generation. I even use it to a certain extent for the podcast to summarize articles and stuff like that. I think it's a great thing. And I think it's just going to be even bigger in 2025. 2024, it really, hit its stretch, but it's got a lot of potential there. Some of the breakthroughs in generative AI models achieved remarkable feats, outperforming experts in various tasks from medical diagnostics to weather forecasting, demonstrating AI's expanding role across different sectors. The fact that it's gone from just being a chatbot to standing up next to legitimate subject matter experts, I think, has been incredibly impressive. The other thing that we saw a lot of were cybersecurity breaches in government agencies. The government that is mandating cybersecurity for all of the industries that it does business with seems to be exceptionally fragile and susceptible to cyber attacks. The U.S. Treasury Department just reported recently significant security incidents involving Chinese state-sponsored hacks that underscore the persistent threats to national security. And then, when we look from an industry standpoint, we look at Intel, who, by all accounts, have suffered their worst year since their IPO in 1971. Intel's market value plunged 61% in 2024, marking its worst performance since going public in 71, while rival chipmaker Broadcom saw shares surge 111% on AI advances. Broadcom is now valued at $1.1 trillion, leveraging its custom XPU chips and networking gear from major cloud providers, including Google, helping companies build AI infrastructure. So again, AI is having an impact not just from a usability standpoint, but from manufacturing and from hosting and, so many different other areas. NVIDIA is another company that has benefited tremendously. Its chips are powering a lot of AI solutions that are out there right now. So there's a lot of stuff going on with that. Apple has run into its own challenges with its product launches. Apple faced hurdles with its Vision Pro headset, which, at $3,500, it's a very hard sell for people to get into. Apple tried to get into AI, and they kind of flubbed that. They've trickled out their AI solutions, not wanting to call it artificial intelligence. They named it Apple Intelligence. Well, when you implement an AI solution, you do it worse than everybody else who has, and then you refuse to call it what it is, and you want to label Apple Intelligence, you can't help but look bad. Consumer reception did not meet expectations for any of these things, and the company has to reassess its strategies with its emerging technologies. I heard rumor that they're coming out with potentially new wearables, a fitness ring, goggles. I think Apple's having a very difficult time trying to find its niche moving forward right now, which is very unusual for Apple. Our debate over TikTok, TikTok's future in the U.S., that's going to resolve soon, but that's been an ongoing concern for quite some time now. Political discussions have intensified regarding the ban, implications for data privacy and national security, despite the fact that nobody still produced a single ounce of evidence to suggest any of these things. We talked about regulatory developments in cybersecurity. CMMC 2.0 just officially released December 16th. That's in effect now. We just talked about today the federal government regulating, making changes to the HIPAA framework for cybersecurity now. So I think the federal government, even though they seem to be victims more than they are partners in cybersecurity at this point in time, They recognize the difference, the dangers, and they're coming to the table a little bit late with a lot of the things that they are trying to do. And I think the transition to another administration is not going to help that moving forward at all. The other thing that we haven't had a chance to talk about here all that much is the expansion of edge computing and Internet of Things. The proliferation, say that 5 times, of Internet of Things tech devices and the need for real-time data processing fueled the growth in edge computing. The trend enables faster decision-making and reduces latency by processing data closer to the source. I see this with, I'm a big fan. I've got 2 different camera systems at home here because I'm kind of paranoid. But my Wise cams, just seeing how the technology for facial recognition and package recognition has increased significantly with the increase with AI, and the devices themselves don't typically have the computing power to handle that. So the edge computing that's been put in place now to handle that has been a significant improvement. And, cybersecurity in general, the data breaches that we've run into. This past year witnessed significant cyber attacks and data breaches, underscoring the critical importance of robust cybersecurity measures. My world is knee-deep in cybersecurity these days. It's complex, it's exhausting, it's frightening to some degree, but it's necessary. There's too many attackers out there that are getting progressively more and more sophisticated. When your attackers are state-sponsored, there's almost unlimited resources for them to take advantage of. So if you don't take it seriously, it's going to be an issue. And I think 2025 is going to see this trend continue. One of the things that 2024 did see, and past years have seen, is an overall lack of resources and trained professionals in cybersecurity training. We need to address that. We can't have that lack of resource, that lack of knowledge, and still expect to compete on the world stage. So these were 10 topics that were recurring themes that sadly, I don't think are going to go away in 2025, at least not the regulatory and cybersecurity ones are. But if nothing else, it gives us a chance to reflect on where we were, where we are, and hopefully where we're going. So in our next podcast, we'll finish up with our framework discussion, and then we just got the research and slides finished for our next deep dive, but I'm hoping to line up 1 or 2 interviews in between then and now. That was all we had for today. Before we go, I want to once again invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, anywhere you get a podcast. We would also invite you to give us your feedback. You can write in or call in. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can call us, leave a voicemail for us. We'll try to get you on the next available podcast. You can reach us at 856-403-8788. That's 856-403-8788. We also do stream 5 days a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. If you are a Amazon Prime subscriber, you do get a free monthly Twitch Prime subscription. If you threw that our way, we'd greatly appreciate it. It helps us keep the lights on. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. Or you can find links to all that and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. That's it. Another one in the books.